and play with us.
The children and the flowers are my sisters and my brothers.
It is here we must begin to seek the wisdom of the children and the graceful way of flowers in the wind. For the children and the flowers are my sisters and my brothers. The laughter and their loveliness would clear a cloudy day, like the music of the mountains and the colors of the rainbow. They're a promise of the future and a blessing.
The book signing meeting is supposed to give a little talk also. I decided so. Well, I have a little talk. That's good. I found out a month or two ago that when I'm described as a philanthropist, I have an uncomfortable feeling because I really am thinking as soon as I get to Phil Ann, the next is going to be Durer.
That's more fun.
And I thought about it, and that's not what it is. It's a wimpy philanthropist. And I realized that, no, I really am a misanthrope. The adult man or woman is a murderous, greedy, sex-addled liar. I just don't know what to do about it. But it makes sense that, you know, if the river is polluted downstream, then you look upstream to see the source. And a lot of us did. Jean-Jacques Rousseau was one of the ones who looked up to youth and childhood. And I think I agree with him very much, I think the book is about that. And when you look at the natural child, the unspoiled child, the child before being grown up, that you do see innocence. And you see an innocence that's entitled to the freedom to explore, to experiment, and to play. The corruptions, this lying, sex-addled stuff, seems to come as we engage in the adult institutions of things like colleges and jobs and stuff like that. And I think it's more or less correct. A lot of people remember the Foxfire Project. Elliot Wigginton did the Foxfire Projects down in the South with kids. He took kids out and they took oral histories and wrote books and published them. It was good. And he was also convicted of pedophilia. But he wrote this: every early elementary school classroom is full of embryonic criminals. It's as natural for little kids to lie and steal as it is for them to breathe. They cheat, fight, show disrespect, and harass each other sexually as free of guilt as if they had just eaten a hot dog. But notice he said, as free of guilt. They are innocent as they do these things. Now, it makes sense for us humans as parents to devise special institutions that are going to manage this transition from childhood to adulthood, the transition from innocence to corruption. And there's schools, there's education, and we talk about it forever. In England in 1967, they did a really thoughtful thinking about what schools are about. And the Plowden report of the Central Advisory Council for Education at the UK wrote this. This was their preface. At the heart of the educational process lies the child. Children need to be themselves, to live with other children and grown-ups, to learn from their environment, to enjoy the present, to get ready for the future, to create and to love, to learn to face adversity, to behave responsibly, in a word, to be human beings. That's wonderful. What I think we've done today instead is we have taken childhood away from our children and replaced it with this thing that we call school, and then we lie to them about it. Agatha Christie wrote this. Isn't that strange that Agatha Christie would come up and say, I suppose it is because all children go to school nowadays and have things arranged for them that they seem so forlornly unable to produce their own ideas. Well, you can get the character of the book. Now, it's not that we don't know how people learn or children learn. And it's not that we're just making a wild guess that what we do in schools is the best way for them to learn. I advertise this a lot. In the year 2000, the governing board of the Natural Research Council is members of the National Academies of Science. This is the platinum standard for clear thinking, good science, no nonsense. We just didn't say it because we thought it was true. This is true. And they wrote a book in 2000, How People Learn, Brain to Mind Experience in School. And at the beginning they say, they really call it learning from speculation to science. They say, and this is the National Academies of Science, that learning is now a science. We know enough about it that we can call it a science. And that's a pretty big step for the Academy to say. Essentially the book says that, well, you read the whole book and you realize that what we've been doing in the community school, which we would call social constructivism, is what they describe as how children learn. Namely, each child, each human, constructs in their own mind, from their own experiences, the state of the mind. And by and large, the most potent experiences we have to be social interactions of one kind or another. So social constructivism is the code word. The book goes on to describe the environment for this to happen, and they say, first of all, it needs to be learner-centered. Teachers attempt to get a sense of what students know and can do, as well as their interests and passions, what each student knows, cares about, is able to do, and wants to do. Okay. They also say that a school needs to be community-centered. It includes the classroom as a community, the school as a community, the degree to which students, teachers, and administrators feel connected to the larger community of homes, businesses, states, the nation, and the world. Little isolated classrooms with blackboards. Now I'm a little alarmed. This book was published in the year 2000. All I read about is education and assorted journals, and no place have I seen this book quoted as this. Here's what we know for sure about learning. So I'm going to close with
like
this.
It fell through the cracks or something?
I don't think people. I think people are happier with the fairy tales about childhood and learning in schools than they would be about the truth.
Is it all right to interrupt and ask questions?
Yeah, no, we're community school. One of my favorites, and it's quoted in the book, Neil Postman wrote it this way. If the institution we call school, it said the institution we call school is what it is because we made it that way. If it is irrelevant, as Marshall McLuhan says, if it shields children from reality, as Norbert Wiener says, if it educates for obsolescence, as John Gardner says, if it does not develop intelligence, as Jerome Bruner says, if it is based on fear, as John Oates says, if it avoids the promotion of significant learnings, as Carl Rogers says, if it induces alienation, as Paul Goodman says, if it punishes creativity and independence, as Edgar Friedenberg says, if, in short, it's not doing what needs to be done, it can be changed, it must be changed.
Here, here.
Yeah. There we are.
There we are. Yeah.
So the book's full of kind of nonsense like that.
Yay, George.
Yeah, it looks like I read.
Yay, George.
All right, I'll sign books first.
Well, now wait a minute.
Oh,
How about probing questions
Probing
from
questions.
the
Probing
audience?
Probing questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Think of that as a...
I know that you're vehemently opposed to standardized testing, and
Yeah.
so am I. And Although when I first heard you talk about that, I thought you were crazy. A couple years ago, how did I come completely full circle? But I mean, I've taken my children out of school and I'm homeschooling now because we don't have that stinking test, and they've never learned more than they've ever learned. And the reason we took our daughter out of school recently, we went to her teacher conference. The teachers, 3 of them said, we're learning this because it's going to be on the test. And that's the dumbest reason of all to learn it's going to be. But everything in the school systems is predicated on those stupid tests. 50% of the teachers, this is the state rules, SB 131 or 161 or whatever it is.
191.
191. They get 50% of the teachers stupid test scores starting this year.
What the teacher's going to teach.
Exactly. Well, they already do it. That's all they do. They pre-test, they post-test, they interim assess. You ask them what they're learning, they say we're assessing for that. I mean, it would be comical if it weren't so sad. These kids are doing these little video game clicker tests, these assessments, and who knows how much they've spent on that. But what can you do to break the
set of teachers believe that their students aren't even trying hard on the test? What's the test going to mean? That
doesn't mean anything.
And that's, this is a statistical fact. 45% of teachers say, I don't think my kids work hard on the test. They're just sitting there filling in the bubbles. It's probably true. Here's what, and it's happening in Seattle. I don't know, are you hearing the news from Seattle? It is, the state law says every child in this, it will take the test. That is, I forget, some code in the state of Colorado. The state has made an agreement to accept federal funds if and only if they require every student to take the test. So they've kind of made a contract. We took your money, federal money, therefore we agree that we will require the test. But there's a higher, almost constitutional thing, which is the parent has control ultimately of the child. The parent can make a decision and is allowed to make a decision about their child taking the test. And that really is above all the other law. And so any parent, you just write a little letter saying, my child is not going to take the test. You give it to the teacher, your child will not take the test.
So what if there's a big, go ahead.
Even in Washington?
Any place in this country, a parent is allowed to protect their child from what they want to protect their child from, like the test.
So then somebody should organize a boycott.
So what are the repercussions?
So let's organize a boycott. I like that.
So what are the repercussions?
I'll tell you what the repercussions are.
If 95% of the kids, if less than 95% take
here's just
the
what
test,
happened
in
Seattle, and it's still kind of hot news. But one whole school, Garfield High School, all of the teachers said, you know, giving this test is, we learn nothing from it. We just bother ourselves and the kids, and we are going to refuse to do it on the grounds that it's not good for kids. And we're here to be good for kids. So the whole high school said, we're just not going to give the test. Well, so then the superintendent said, well, you're all going to do 10 days without pay, suspension without pay. Now that's going to piss a lot of parents off. 10 days their kids can't go to school. And then he said, no, wait a minute. We're going to have the principals and the assistant principals give the test if the teachers won't. So we'll herd them all in the computer lab and the principals will make them take the test. 300 of the 400 parents opted their kids out of the test. They are, as we might say, screwing with the system effectively.
Well, it's called nonviolent non-cooperation.
Yeah, it's totally...
It's Henry David Thoreau, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, you know, there's a reason.
Organized to teach toward the test all the time, opting the kids out of taking the test. I mean, they're still in the school that's teaching toward the test, you know.
But guess what? Well, here's what happens if you do opt out. The state in its wisdom says if we don't have 95% participation in the test, if 95% of the kids don't take it, 5% opt out, then we don't know how good that school is, so we'll just lower it one grade just to let them know that there's probably not a good school.
Yeah. Well, sure. Well, how does that affect the bell curve?
Yeah,
I mean, really, 5%, 5% out.
What we would like to do is get a lot of parents to opt out and say, you know, we never really did give a crap about how you scored our school. We score our school by how well they treat our children.
So we wouldn't lose state funding because that's right.
No, in fact,
then there's nothing to lose.
if you make the school bad enough, they have to give you more money to fix it. So here's the argument: the kid doesn't have to take the test. The whole system begins to say, "What are we giving tests for if the kids don't take them?" And we have to give them more money. Wait a minute, this is not working.
Okay, so that's what I was worried about. If I proposed it, then we'd lose all of our funding and be even more underfunded.
No, you actually gain funding.
Okay, that's great.
What happens to the kids, like individually, if just a couple kids opt out of the test, but the rest of the school takes it? Do their grades?
You can, and it's difficult. You can look up in the state records and find out how many in the state of Colorado do opt out. About 2,000 a year. Nothing happens. There's another little checkbox on the test that some kids get, they can really get agitated. Well, they puke on their test and things like that.
There's a lot of pressure.
On purpose?
It shows some emotional distress. And the teacher is allowed to say, Johnny, it's okay, you don't have to finish the test, go sit in the library. So the teacher has that freedom and that check. That's another 2,000 tests per year that have that box checked.
Can I ask you, one thing I'm confused about. When I was a child, there was always standardized testing, but there wasn't a big drama about it. You just did it and got over it. And
it's the most important thing in the school. It's drilled into the kids every single day. You have to
we used to, but not every year, and not 12 hours of testing.
And they were more in your further education.
To be honest, there was that sort of thing about...
theoretically.
Yeah, quit dreaming about college is probably not going to work for you.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to finish this because I think this isn't about testing kids. It's about punishing teachers.
It's ending up to be...
It's about punishing teachers.
Now, it's already not the most attractive job in the world as far as salary, working conditions. And now to add, and besides, if you take this job, we're going to punish you for the rest of your life. You're really going to get the cream of the crop going to teachers' college.
And
these 5-paragraph things.
Now at $400 an hour, do you get like 14 bucks? No incentive whatsoever. Yeah.
I mean, a human being is inherently seeking a simple answer, like God made me do it or whatever. And these test scores they give a simple answer, and a whole bunch of people out there said, look, it's a number, it's an answer. You know, how can you deny that this teacher doesn't get good test scores?
So George,
let me read, just talking about teacher evaluation. You know, teachers are now going to be evaluated. If you don't get your kids good test scores, you will be in trouble. And here's something I learned about teachers. He was spoken to or about always as E.J. Capella, the whole name. And the high school kids talked about him quite a lot. E.J. Capella taught driver's ed and shop. Driver's ed brought him into contact with essentially all of the students, and they all trash-talked him to his face and to each other. Now, you know high schools, you'd be a queer if you didn't go along with the crowd. It was mostly the guys who took the shop course as a gut. And there was a wood stove in the shop both for heat and to get rid of the scraps and the sawdust. Doug told me how he shoved a carton of 9mm Lugol shells in the stove, and how as they popped off, E.J. Capella pretended it wasn't happening. As near as I could tell, E.J. interpreted all of this attention as, heck, the reason they joke around is because they like me. Now, David Jones was also well known and talked about, and like E.J. Capella, was always referred to by his full name, David Jones. He carried a briefcase and never took off his felt pork pie hat. Because my course was based upon passing tests rather than class attendance, and David Jones was good at passing tests, I didn't see him often. Whenever we did meet, he talked quietly and hurriedly about stuff like quarks and black holes. His dad would call me some evenings and tell me how bright his son was. He's nearly finished with an alternative theory of relativity. His classmates did not regard him as just another nerd. He was the school's unique nerdiest of all nerds and was treated as an untouchable alien. One day, after he'd given me a little review of his work on superconductivity, he told me, he said, there is one teacher here who has made all of the difference in my life. E.J. Capella. I have since been more cautious about judging either teachers or students by any simple measures. You just never know.
You never know. No, that's really true.
That's a true story, I mean. And I still think E.J. was a shitty teacher.
You know, my son was an early community school boy.
He was.
He
You
was.
and Michael taught him how to think. And when he was a little boy, he didn't like it if it was time for me to leave. And Michael would take him to the pottery studio, and that was right for Gordon. And I look back on those days when the community school was still, you know, really true to its mission, and how much they catered to the individual child. And it's just gotten harder and harder to educate your child authentically. I mean, when we did it, and we were on a long, my husband and I were on a long, you know, eccentric journey. But Gordy worked at the White House after graduating from DU last year, and as Chris Faison said, of course he's there.
I think all we who know him say,
You know, and he's so political, and he just came back from the inauguration, and I think all that early community school education taught him to be authentic.
You know, because we used to talk in days when we actually had progressive education. We always used to talk about the factory model, about, you know, they're all the same age, they go from this room to this room, and in this room they get the lug bolts put on. It's the multiplication table, and this, you know, and that they then proceed as the factory model. And we now have the Common Core standards, that all kids will come out with a Common Core. And I have all the tests where we know damn well that they all are. It is an absolute standardized product, factory model production, and it never was right. It's crap. But, and I'm trying to promote the idea, inside, the system inside is not going to say, wow, we're wrong and we're change. That's not going to happen. I mean, I talk to teachers about, no, I'll lose my job. I talk to administrators, so no, I mean, they tell me I'll lose my job. You know. But parents, in their power to say no more to tests, just simply, my kid's not going to take the test. You guys can go screw with yourselves as much as you want. My kid is sitting it out. I claim we desegregated the South with exactly that kind of an attitude.
Here, here.
So I'm talking it out.
So the kids have the power.
The parents have the power.
Parents.
Parent power.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like religion, you know. You can have your own religion. You know, they can't mess with your religion, and they can't mess with your kids.
Same thing, yeah.
So
there's a good story, and I like it. That you know that the president of our school board has never seen the test that he requires the whole school district to take. He's never seen it. You know why? He's not allowed to. He's not allowed to see it. He might spill the beans or say something bad about it. He just is not allowed to see the test that he's required to give to every student.
Well, because then he could teach the kids the test.
He might
cheat
say,
and
he might
Xerox it and give it to all the kids, though, too.
Oh yeah, or he might
Yeah, that would
cheat.
Now,
can he see it after the fact? Can they see the test
No.
after the fact? They can never
no,
look at it.
never.
But
Or I said about.
to get one? Didn't you petition to get
Well,
one?
so they are a secret. If you ask a teacher, how come you don't just spread them out? You know, give it to the press. Let everybody see this damn thing. Judge for yourself. Look at this test. He said, well, I can't let it out. And in fact, you know, on test day, your door is knocked on as a teacher. You're handed a little package. You have to sign for the test. That signature is a pledge of confidentiality. And if you release the test, you have broken a signed oath to keep it confidential, and you will be fired.
Right. So we're leaving it up to the kids to sit there
The parents,
and
yeah.
well, but the kids are getting this test.
Yeah.
And we're going to leave it up to the kids to go, well, you know what, this isn't right. right? The kids
Yeah.
are the ones that, because no one else can,
They get to see
an adult can't look at that and go, this is wrong.
for fun, and just because Hunter taught me to be an outlaw, I figured out how long would it take me to get a complete copy of the 10th grade CSAP underground. 3 days. I had a complete copy.
3 days.
You went to Hunter for that?
I learned how to.
3 days, really? I would have expected less.
Yeah.
Anyway, I think of the mania for testing and the sort of the culture of punishing teachers and the inability to incorporate the fact that there are all these children who speak English as a second language that factor in, etc. So, but what I believe is that literacy is the problem. All the mania is like a dysfunctional reaction. So I still think that if you get too hung up on the dysfunction, you forget what the central problem is how do children learn to read. That's the fundamental. The dysfunctional reaction is because there are millions of children in this country that are illiterate. And that's a problem.
But part of that problem is that you might be a slow learner. I've seen that. Or it just might be very difficult for you because your native language is not English. But it's, you will read now. Not you will read when you feel like reading or when you want to read, or how can I help you get there. It's like you're on this freight train, maybe, and you miss, there's now going to be a kindergarten entrance exam. Are you ready for kindergarten? You do an entrance exam. Huh? The state is about to pass a law that if you are not literate at a certain level at the end of 3rd grade, you will repeat 3rd grade because you're not going to 4th grade until you've got it.
Well, that's what I meant, because the reaction's dysfunctional. But
the reactions are dysfunctional.
But, I was talking to some people in Denver that, and a politician who had at one time been a teacher. And, she actually believes that it's also just about the process, that somehow, in all this craziness, people forgot how to teach kids how to read. They just actually forgot how to do that.
Actually...
And they adopted methods that don't work.
And guess what happens if they don't particularly want to learn to read? That's step 1 is they want to learn to read. And step 2 is I know how to help them learn. And we got a little Ben, and he's like 2 and 3, and we get the picture books out. It's bedtime Ben, and we just read the books and say, look at the alligator. And Ben finally said, Dad, I wish you wouldn't do that. I don't like it. And you know what my response was? I quit reading to him.
Yeah, well, my son Johnny, I don't know if any of you remember, he's 26 now. He wasn't reading like the little girls next to him, and he said, Mom, my feelings tell me I don't belong in school. And because of my understanding that Johnny would be just fine because we live in a loving universe, he dropped out of school, and someone showed up to him, Bob Stewart, showed up to teach him to read at his own leisure. And he wove in and out of the community school, and he's now a voracious reader and an amazing writer and a amazing photographer. But my father and his father wouldn't read because his father would make him go into his room when he was disciplining him and say, "Go read a book." So we can turn kids off to reading by being so paranoid about the whole situation when they'll do it on their own.
What I always say is, I really don't care. I used to get a little concerned. I would do some intervention if by the end of 4th grade it wasn't very going on. But my goal was not to be reading in 3rd grade. My goal was to be reading at age 25.
Yeah, exactly. That's my point.
That's real clear. And I didn't want to nip the bud at 3rd grade and make it just distasteful.
Yeah, exactly.
As soon as I can quit, I will quit. Which happens.
Well, because everything's so numerically driven and test driven.
I
have a neighbor who's in 2nd grade, and he's been tracked into an intervention class.
Oh yeah.
He's a dummy. He thinks he's a dummy. He's a very bright kid. He's a dummy. He's in a dummy class. He's going to stay there. He hates to go to school. He told his father the other day that he's not a good reader. I'm not going to be a good reader. Like the love of reading and the joy of learning has been sucked out of this child that's about this tall. It's heartbreaking because he's not on track to pass that CSAT. That's the only reason that
Johnny Marlowe
this is
saved
happening
himself a
to
lot of wear and tear and pain.
Now, a lot of people think that we're using real data in order to make these important decisions, like you got to read third. Now, it turns out that people who are bad readers in third grade, you could predict with 70% reliability whether they'll graduate from high school or not. So kids who don't read well young, with some reasonable probability, leave school. There is what do we call, it's a quality of care index, which is how, and it's done at 42 months. Third grade is 8 years old. At 42 months, you can look at the quality of care index for that infant and predict with 77% reliability whether or not they'll graduate from high school. The game is over about graduating from high school. The game is over by 42 months if you didn't do it right. Your kid's not going to graduate. How about that? We know that. It's interesting. Now, I hear the 70%, you know, if you don't read by third grade, you're not going to graduate. I don't hear that if your home life is not pretty damn good by age 36 months, they're not going to graduate.
Well, who says that graduating is so important anyway?
Well, I said that. That's one of the things I've written here. The kid asks his teacher.
George,
Yeah.
how do you even begin to infiltrate like the East Coast prep school world? Are you going to send a copy to every headmaster and start, you know, you're preaching to the choir here. It needs to get out there as a message because these feeder schools to the top colleges are so entrenched. A father came up to me the other day on the mountain and said, my son got an 800 on the SAT, and I said, so? Look at him, he's so unhappy. And didn't go over that well.
There's a funny thing happening, which we now know, is that 50% of recent undergraduates, just graduated, are unemployed. They're unemployable because they got a degree. And the fact
Because
of the
why?
matter,
Because
they're not employable just because they got a degree.
right. Okay.
And when you think about it, the fact that I march out in my little thing at Harvard, did that create a job anyplace? I mean, I'm ready for a job, but it didn't create one. And more and more people, the employer understands that they have to pay, ultimately they have to pay your college costs. And if they don't think it's worth it, if that degree does not improve their bottom line to the extent that they can pay off your loan, they pay you enough that you pay off your loan, they're just going to hire cheaper labor, and that's what they're doing. So pretty soon people are going to find out, you know what, it's expensive, it's 4 years, it doesn't get me much. What are my options? And I see a really good option emerging in the community colleges. Two ways. In one way, getting the joint credit in high school for community college course, it gives you a little more challenging, a little less test-driven kind of an experience, a little more maturity. For a lot of students, that CMC course, it's much more engaging for them, and they get the joint credit, and pretty soon they have the skill which is just as job-worthy as my Harvard degree.
They were self-motivated to do it.
And they had a pretty good time, and the dorm was back at Mom's house.
George, what's the lowest salary you would settle for?
Me?
Yeah, for schoolers.
Would I?
Just schoolers. With that degree.
When I left the university in 1972, which I can't translate, but I had a PhD, a 3-year postdoc, 7 years on the job, tenure in a professor, $12,500.
Wow. We'll give you half that.
We're
here now.
All right, I can sense we're nicely
Thank you.
Yeah,
Great.
nice, George.
Thanks, George. Great, George.
It is written from the desert to the mountains, they shall lead us by the hand and by the heart, and they will comfort you and me in their innocence and trusting. They will teach us to be free.